Mehmed has been a good colleague for us at Washington University. He's the president of Boğaziçi University in Istanbul. He got his undergraduate degree there, electrical and electronic engineering. And he studied at Vanderbilt. He got his PhD in electrical engineering. And he's done a lot of different research projects. You might wonder what, he doesn't have to know about infection, but he knows about a lot of different things in the medical field. And in reviewing some of his background, one of the more interesting things I found, I don't think this can be a problem for infection. Well, maybe this could be a problem for infection too. But he's been working on an anthropomorphic prosthetic hand. He did a lot of robotics. So he's somebody who comes with a wide variety of background research interests, and he's going to be moderating our session this morning. So Mehmed Özkan, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much, Jim. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues and students, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and it is a privilege and honor to present our three distinguished panelists addressing an important health challenge that the humankind is facing from infections. In the first half of our session, our panelists will be delivering their presentations in about 8 minutes each, and we will open the floor for questions and answers and discussions. The first presentation, titled Antimicrobial Stewardship, Asia Perspective, will be delivered by Professor Anucha Apisarnthanarak. Professor Apisarnthanarak received his MD in 1995 from McDonnell University in Bangkok. After completing internal medicine residency at George Washington University in 2000, he joined Washington University School of Medicine, specializing in infectious diseases and hospital epidemiology. In 2003, after he became a professor at Thammasat University Hospital in Thailand, he has been very active in several international committees and the National Science Committee of Thailand. He is currently the Chief of Division of Infectious Diseases at Thammasat University Hospital. Dr. Apisarnthanarak's research focus includes infection prevention in resource-limited settings, infection control to prevent multi-drug-resistant microorganisms, as well as outbreak investigations. In these areas, he has published more than 200 peer-reviewed articles and more than 20 peer-reviewed book chapters. Let's welcome Professor Apisarnthanarak.
First, I would like to thank Singapore University and Professor William Powdery for a kind invitation to be here. And my assignment is to address the antimicrobial resistance in the Asia perspective. And I understand that most of the audience are in non-medical field, so I try to minimize my medical languages here. So I would like to start by saying that what CDC alarming us is that there are a lot of drug resistant that I will call MDRO in my talk. And there are many of them, but believe it or not, in Asia we have a lot more than what they describe in here because of multiple aspects that we are facing. And I will share with you what happened in Asia. The difference between Asia and US is first, everything that happened in US appeared in the news. Even a single case of Ebola, a single case of superbug appeared in Washington Post, but we do not. But this is the thing that is different, and it also happened in many social media as well. Interestingly, it is the history of UN that they respond to MDRO as a health crisis. And as you can see here, it is the first time in the 70-year history that UN called a health crisis as MDRO. And according to mankind, it is not that it may happen in the future. It is a very present reality in all parts of the world already. So we should really have to put an effort to control it. Not so good news is that it is very obvious that when you think about the MDRO, people think about antibiotics. But as you look at the time frame after we discovered penicillin, a lot of antibiotics came out, but the rapid emergence of drug resistance also came out as well. And eventually, we are not keeping up with this thing, and it's really need to emphasize the need for urgent control for this drug-resistant organism in our community. The cause of antimicrobial resistance in Asia is quite complicated in many ways. First, because we have many inappropriate use of antibiotics in community. Secondly, we have a lot of inappropriate use of antibiotics in agriculture and in animal industry. And third, in the hospital, we don't use antibiotics well enough, and also we have poor infection prevention in infection for the hospital as well because of limited infrastructure in most part of Asia, and I will address each of them. The first problem that you need in many countries in Asia is the fact that we face with a lot of inappropriate use of antibiotics in community. This is the photo of the drugstore that when you travel to Thailand and a lot of countries in Southeast Asia and you get sick and you went to the drugstore, they will prescribe you antibiotics without prescription. Why we did the study, and we asked our medical student to pretend to be the patient and presenting with influenza-like illness and non-operation wound, diarrhea, and believe it or not, 70% of them get antibiotic back from the local drugstore, which is quite alarming. Secondly, a lot of countries in this region still use antibiotic as a growth promoter. And you can see here, it may be good as a growth promoter, but when humans consume it and they get sick, they're likely to acquire drug-resistant organism. And when they admitted to the hospital, they were more likely to be a source of transmitting drug resistance to the hospital as well. Not only that, having the food antibiotic as a food promoter has an international impact because many documents has alarming us that international spread of multi-drug resistance like Salmonella, E. coli has been emergent in many countries and originated from the feeding with antibiotic to those animals. And also there are some documents from China as well, as you can see here. Antibiotic misuse is one of the problems, and according to the study, up to 70%, 50% or more of antibiotic use in the hospital seem to be inappropriate. And this is not only leading to multi-drug resistance, but it's also causing a higher mortality, length of stay, and cost of healthcare consumption as well, which is not surprising. So what should we do to prevent these in Asia? First, we have to reduce and don't abuse antibiotic use. This is the key message. For the patient themselves, they have to reduce the pressure for the doctor to prescribe an antibiotic. Secondly, you need to invest for yourself. What is a good investment? Vaccine. Vaccine is considered a very good investment, like influenza vaccine, invasive pneumococcal vaccine, and thirdly, you really need to take good care of yourself by means of doing a good hygiene, like hand washing, which have a fair amount of evidence suggesting that it reduces infection, not only in the hospital, but also in the community, viral disease, and also GI disease, that you have diarrhea, etc., can be reduced with such a good hygiene. If you want to target antibiotic consumption, it is complicated, but the first thing you really need to have the government commitment. And it is an example from China that after the government have the commitment to do it, many hospitals gathering and doing the network of controlling antibiotic use that resulting in less antibiotic consumption in many parts of China already. In healthcare, interestingly, one of the easiest interventions is to wash hands, but not many people wash hands. Believe it or not, changing can be difficult. This reflecting how difficult for the change is. The pioneer of hand washing is Semmelweis that has been shown in 1818 that washing hands is associated with reduction of infection and also reduced mortality as well. Believe it or not, no one really adapts Semmelweis approach and they go into the pathway of trying to do more antibiotic. And until 2000, they believe that antibiotic is not the answer. You really need to adopt Semmelweis approach is to washing hands to reduce the rate of infection as well as mortality as well. Last but not least, in the hospital, you need to not only reduce antibiotic consumption inappropriately and also washing hands, you really need to clean the environmental well and also need to follow the precaution per CDC that suggests you to wear glove and washing hands frequently when you see the patient to reduce the load of transmission of disease. With that, I would like to conclude my 8-minute presentation that antibiotic resistant in Asia came from various and complicated aspects. Secondly, there are clear evidence suggested that it do harm to community and hospitalized patients. And third, combating multi-drug resistant bacteria in Asia requires commitment from government, hospital collaboration using One Health approach. I think it is a good opportunity for us to do a greater research to combat with MDRO in this conference and on the network in global health. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Api, for this very enlightening presentation. Actually, massive inappropriate use of antibiotical drugs and antibiotics has been a big problem in Turkey as well until recently. But luckily, the government has adapted a very strong policy to control antibiotic usage, and it is already having some good effect as a result. Now let me introduce you to our next panelist, Professor Kwok-Yung Yuen, who is a microbiologist, a surgeon, and a physician. Very impressive, all three specializations. Professor Yuen graduated from the University of Hong Kong in 1981. Among his numerous fellowships at distinguished institutions include the Hong Kong Colleges of Pathologists, Surgeons, and Physicians, the Royal College of Physicians, Surgeons, and Pathologists in UK, and the American College of Physicians. He was a Further Senior Medical Research Fellow in 2006 and 2007. Professor Yuen made his mark in 2003 when the outbreak of severe acute respiratory syndrome, or known as SARS, gripped the globe. He played a key role in the discovery of the agent causing SARS and the SARS coronavirus, which are crucial to containing the outbreak of SARS. He has also led his team in the discovery of over 50 novel disease agents, including the novel human coronavirus, the bat coronaviruses, and many other bacteria, fungi, and parasites. Professor Yuen has been the first co-director of State Key Laboratory of Emerging Infectious Diseases at HQA. The HE-STAR government has honored his contributions with the awards of Silver Bohania Star and Gold Bohania Star. He has published more than 850 papers in peer-reviewed journals and he received over 25,000 citations. Professor Yuen is a Henry Koch Professor in Infectious Diseases and Chair of Infectious Diseases, Department of Microbiology, Chinese Academy of Engineering. Let's invite Professor Yuen to the podium.
Thank you, Chairman, for the very kind introduction. Thanks to the organizer for inviting me to give this presentation on emerging viral infection rather than China. So we first stepped into this field in 1997 when H5N1 infected humans in Hong Kong with 18 cases and 6 patients died. Within a few years, H5N1 spread to the mainland, Southeast Asia, and then almost the whole world. And that was only controlled by poultry slaughtering and also finally the poultry H5N1 vaccine. But is H5N1 vaccine or other poultry vaccine the answer to this problem? So if you look at this food consumption structure of Hong Kong residents, you'll see that within just 30 years, between 1973 to 2003, there is almost a threefold increase in poultry consumption in Hong Kong, and that is now happening in mainland China. And similarly, for the other meats, the total meat consumption is almost double within 30 years. So the challenges is first the growth of population, economy, and demand for animal proteins. And the other challenge is more cultural, and especially Southern Chinese love to eat live poultry bought from wet markets, and which means that the wet market, which should not be a farm, becoming a farm within the central urban area, which is fueling the outbreaks of avian influenza viruses. Now you can see that besides the seasonal influenza, we now have a lot of avian influenzas, and in the case of H7N9, which is another avian influenza virus jumping from animal to human, we now have more than 1,500 cases with more than 600 deaths, which despite the H5N1 vaccine that we are using, and now the China government is implementing the binary poultry vaccines involving both H5N1 and H7N9. But that is not the answer, because you can see that there are many new subtypes like H6, H10 and H7 also emerging, and how much poultry vaccine that you can invent and implement. So I believe that it is our agricultural practice, especially in backyard farms, where you have close proximity of both the wild birds, the poultry, the swine, and human together, which allow genetic reassortment and recombination for making new pandemic viruses, including new pandemic influenza viruses. So then our second challenge comes in 2003 when we have SARS. We saw the first patient in Hong Kong, and then finally we hunt down the amplification host in seabed in the wildlife market in Shenzhen and also in Guangdong. And then by controlling these amplification hosts, diseases, we are able to control the outbreak. Remember, we haven't found the natural reservoir then, because there are so many wild animals in the wild, and that is a big problem. And finally, after quite a bit of effort, 2 years after SARS, we finally discovered the natural ancestral host in the Chinese fossil beds, and then we have the bat SARS coronavirus found, which is very closely related to the xenoid and human SARS coronavirus. Now, because of this finding, finally the government agreed with us that they should give money to us for doing virologic surveillance in wild animals and also in food animals. And with that money, we are able to find more than 60 novel viruses at our departments in Hong Kong University. And that includes both human and also animal viruses. But the problem is, after finding so many viruses, can we predict which virus has the potential to jump the species barrier from animal to human? We are very fortunate because during this process we have found another two bat coronavirus called the HKU4 and also HKU5, and during that period. And we are very lucky because one morning, after I was being contacted by the Secretary of Health saying that I'm wasting the money by finding a lot of animal viruses with no public health significance, then I read this paper in New England Journal of Medicine telling us that the Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus is most closely related to our bat coronavirus HKU4 and HKU5, which we found 5 years ago, 5 years ahead of the epidemic. And that shows that actually virologic surveillance in wild animals and food animals are actually very important. I just want to, this is very complicated, but I just want the audience to understand that many years ago, perhaps in the year 1890s, there has been an instance of a coronavirus called OC43, jumping first from the rats into bovine, probably a bovine species of cattle, and then jump into human. And then in 2003, we have the SARS coronavirus, at the end of 2002 to 3, and that is from bats to xenoid and then to human. And then we have now the Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus, which probably also is coming from bats into camels before going to human. 3 instances of wild animal coronaviruses jumping finally through an intermediate host and then to human. And that shows that that is going to happen again and again. This concept of ancestral animal hosts, intermediate animal hosts in domestic animals, and then human as accidental hosts. Now, and that is not the end of story, because if you look at these two pie charts, you can see that on the left of the vertebrates, the warm-blooded vertebrates, the birds has more than 15,000 species, and they are actually the what we call the gene pool for the evolution of influenza virus, and that is of course related to H5N1 and H7N9. And on this side, you can see that among the mammals, the bats has more than 1,000 species, and finally we have 3 instances of coronaviruses jumping into human. And also the rodents has more than 5,000 species, very biodiverse. And that is actually 3 weeks ago, we published in Emerging Infectious Disease, Hong Kong identified the world's first ever rat hepatitis E virus. Now, so that is a very clear message. The birds, the bats, and the rodents. But how do we do virus surveillance? There are so many species of warm-blooded vertebrates with higher biodiversity. I just want to summarize in this list the important emerging and re-emerging infection in Hong Kong and also China. You can see many influenza viruses, many coronaviruses, and then you also see that we have problems with insects, the global warming. You can see that one of them is a severe fever with thrombocytopenia syndrome, SFTS, which is a tick-borne viruses which may have been related to global warming. And also we have re-emerging dengue viruses infection in Guangdong and even in Hong Kong this year. So global warming has a lot to do, probably a lot to do with mosquito and tick-borne diseases. And I just want to say again that although there are new emerging viruses in animals, that doesn't seem to jump the species barrier in human. But we have outbreaks of tuberculosis related to immunosuppression of bird species by adenovirus, novel cetarcin adenovirus, leading to increased shedding of the bacteria Chlamydia cetarcin, that finally leading to outbreaks of human tuberculosis. So these are lessons that we have to learn from emerging infectious diseases. I must say, I'm sure that you will agree with me that all the factors driving emerging and re-emerging infections are all present in China. Rising aging population, mobility, rapid socio-economic expansion, lacking hygiene and public health and regulatory measures, global warming, changing human behaviors such as sexual practice, eating practices, body beautification, and of course microbial adaptation, microbial genome adaptation are all happening at the same time. I just try to summarize my talk by saying that 75% of emerging pathogens are coming from animals, especially the RNA viruses. It probably all comes from wild animals, such as wild birds, the bats. They get go into food and domestic animals like poultry, etc. And then they start to infect humans in the farm, the abattoir, and also the market. Finally, they go to the hospital, infecting doctors and nurses and other patients, and then they go back to the community, causing major outbreak. And genetic mutations and adaptation occur all along. Now, so remember the surveillance must be done at the level of wild animals, food and domestic animals, farms, abattoir, and market, hospital, and of course the community. That's how the public health surveillance should be done. At the end, I just want to summarize all the main public health problems of mainland China and Hong Kong by quoting one important Confucian literature from Li Ji. What it says here is, I try to translate in Chinese, from Chinese to English, but it may not be correct completely, right? Eating and sex are vital to the existence and continuation of mankind. And that, of course, you can understand that with the opening of China in 1976 by Mr. Deng Xiaoping, there's an economic booming in China. And people have more money, then they ask for more food, especially meat proteins and drugs, because we want to live longer and they want to enjoy life. And then they have more sex, and then the population grows. But the public health, biosecurity, and regulatory measures are not really catching up with this rocketing demand for meat proteins and drugs. And then we have emerging infectious disease in food and wild animals. We have tainted food and drug. And of course, long term, we have obesity now and diabetes again in China. And then you have more sex after you're eating more. You have sexually transmitted disease and HIV, AIDS in the long run, and also sex selection for male babies instead of female. Very bad Chinese culture, I say. And then we have population growth, and we have a large susceptible mobile population that enhance the transmission of novel infection. And that leads to pollution, shortage of food, water, healthcare, energy, resource, road traffic accidents, global warming, and then we have more mosquitoes and ticks, and that fuel the other problems like dengue. This is a China domestic population migration map, showing that in the coastal area, there are population going from this very rural area coming in the coastal area to find work. And you can see that we have the 1997 H5N1 outbreak of avian influenza in the Pearl River Delta. It was then followed by SARS in 2003, and then in 2013 we have the Yangtze River Delta affected by avian influenza H7N9. All these basically are acute respiratory infections with high mortality of up to 40-50%. And the most important challenge is that we need research and implementation of a robust public health system, intensive animal and human surveillance, rapid diagnostic tests, real-time notification, broad-spectrum antiviral, and finally, a universal vaccine. So thank you very much for your kind attention. 8 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Yuen, for the very interesting speech and for tackling this SARS and many others like it. SARS has been our nightmare for some time, and it's good to know experts like yourself are able to solve such a global problem for us. Our last but not least presentation will be delivered by Professor William Powderly. For more than 20 years, Dr. Powderly has been actively engaged in research to improve treatments for patients with HIV. His initial studies focused on evaluating drug cocktails to identify effective first-line treatment for HIV. He has also been involved in research to understand the long-term side effects of HIV medications, particularly metabolic problems like diabetes, lipid abnormalities, and osteoporosis. Professor Powderly has served in a number of leadership roles in his field, including as Vice Chair of the US AIDS Clinical Trial Group and Chair of its Scientific Steering Committee. He has been a member of numerous advisory groups on HIV and infectious diseases for NIH and the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention. He also was the first chairman of the HIV Medicine Association. Dr. Powderly is the author of more than 300 scientific journal articles and book chapters on HIV and AIDS. He is a fellow of the Infectious Disease Society of America, the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland, and the American Association of the Advancement of Science. Dr. Powderly is the Dr. J. Williams Campbell Professor of Medicine and the Larry J. Shapiro Director of the Institute of Public Health at Washington University in St. Louis. He is also co-director of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Washington University School of Medicine. When I was chatting with Dr. Powderly a few minutes ago, actually, because as you may tell by now, this is not my area of specialization, and I was reading the title very rapidly, and I read by mistake, Interesting Epidemics, HIV and Tuberculosis. Then I said, okay, scientists will find it interesting. Of course, viruses are interesting. But then I found it's not interesting. It is intersecting epidemics, HIV and tuberculosis. Now we will understand how they are intersecting. Let's invite Professor Powderly.
Thank you very much for that introduction. As you heard, the theme of this session is to remind you that infections, which have been a scourge of mankind since the beginning of history, have not gone away. We have two important epidemics. One is very recent. HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, crossed from species into man in the mid part of the 20th century, was recognized first as a problem in 1981, and rapidly spread across the world, to the point where approximately 40 million people have died of AIDS in the 30 years since it was first described, and approximately 40 million people are currently living with it. The vast majority are living in Africa, but it affects every part of the world. We've made substantial progress. We now have technology, antiviral drugs, that if taken and taken appropriately can restore the life expectancy of a person with HIV infection. So the challenge for the world is to ensure that that technology is more widely available. And it has, with a concerted effort on a worldwide scale, had increasing availability. We're now at the point where approximately 60% of the world's population with HIV infection have access to antiviral therapy. That is approximately 20 million people. And that has occurred in a period of about 15 years. So it's a remarkable worldwide response. And what it has meant is that the number of newly infected people in the world has decreased from a peak of somewhere between 3 and 4 million people a year in the mid-1990s to about 2 million people a year currently. It's also meant that the number of deaths, which peaked in about 15 years ago at somewhere around 2 million deaths a year, has decreased now to 1 million deaths per year. But 1 million deaths per year and 2 million new cases per year does not mean the epidemic has disappeared. It's important to realize that this technology has made a difference. What you see, particularly in the first part of this graph, is in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, the changes in life expectancy in countries that resulted from the HIV epidemic, and the reverse of that with the increasing availability of treatment technology in those populations. Tuberculosis, in contrast, may be one of the oldest epidemics. There's evidence that tuberculosis accompanied man's movement from Africa to the rest of the world. It certainly has been recognized as an infection in Chinese, Egyptian, and other literature for at least 10,000 years. It is now the leading infectious cause of death in the world, approximately 1.5 million people dying from it. It's a bacterial infection spread by person to person. The coughing individual in the subway next to you could be the person transmitting tuberculosis. Approximately a third of the world's population is infected with this bacterium, but not all succumb to that infection and actually have a disease, an illness. But many do. And in the absence of therapy, it will be fatal for the majority of those individuals. But this, unlike HIV, is a curable infection. We actually can cure tuberculosis. We have technology. It's difficult. It requires 6 months or more of treatment, but it is a curable infection. So who carries the burden of tuberculosis in the world? It is the poor and the vulnerable. And I think Director Barat's talk yesterday really emphasized the challenge we have. Tuberculosis became less of a problem in the Western world, not because of medical technology, not because of the development of anti-tuberculous drugs, but because we improved the conditions in which people lived. They were less crowded, they had better ventilation, and poverty was reduced. It is also driven by the other social factors, both nutritional and illnesses that can contribute to tuberculosis, as well as populations that face stigma and discrimination. But HIV has become a major driver of tuberculosis, and in fact the two epidemics intersect in very important ways. Tuberculosis is the leading cause of death in people with HIV/AIDS. The virus itself doesn't kill people. What it does is it destroys their immune system and their ability to resist infection. And the most important infection worldwide that kills people with HIV is tuberculosis. But HIV also makes tuberculosis worse for those individuals and for the communities in which those individuals live. It means that the person infected is more likely to succumb to disease and is more likely to transmit that disease to other people. So what we have seen is that the trends in terms of HIV that I showed you earlier, the reduction in number of cases, has been associated with a total reduction in tuberculosis deaths, but we still have 1.5 million people per year dying of tuberculosis, a curable infection in the world. And of the deaths from tuberculosis, 20% are directly attributable to HIV and AIDS, and probably another 10 to 15% are attributable to the community effect of transmission by HIV-infected individuals. The parts of the world that are most vulnerable should be no surprise. They are the parts of the world where you can overlay an economic deprivation index. But particularly tuberculosis is a major problem in Africa and in sub-Saharan Africa. And indeed, HIV in sub-Saharan Africa is the main reason why the global incidence of tuberculosis continues to rise. And so, understanding the fact that both of these infectious epidemics feed upon each other and contribute to the challenges that each other control will need is an important understanding. The other issue is that we have a curable infection, but many parts of the world see a very high mortality from tuberculosis because of the lack of access to that cure. So you can see from this map that the lightly shaded areas are the parts of the world where you are less likely to die of tuberculosis should you get it. But in many parts of the world, Africa in particular, but also in many parts of Asia and in Latin America, the case fatality rate, that is the likelihood of dying if you get tuberculosis, is much higher. We also have a problem of drug-resistant tuberculosis. It comes in part from the same issues you heard about for drug-resistant bacterial infections. That is, irrational use of the drugs, inappropriate use of the drugs, but it also comes from an issue of inadequate care and inadequate access, intermittent access. And this makes tuberculosis an even greater problem. Interestingly, the parts of the world that are most affected by resistant tuberculosis are not the same as the parts of the world where you see the most mortality, in part because the reason for mortality is lack of access to drugs. It is inadequate access or inappropriate use that leads to resistance, and you can see that the former Soviet Union leads the world in resistant tuberculosis, but China is also an important country in terms of resistance. The challenge we have really relates back to the fact that both of these diseases are increasingly diseases of the poor and vulnerable. We actually have technology that can dramatically change the trajectory of these illnesses. We know how to conquer tuberculosis. TB in the Western world is an illness we see, we recognize, but we can treat it. TB in many parts of the world is an intractable epidemic because we haven't had the word that was used yesterday in the talk on food was the will. And what we haven't had in the case of tuberculosis is the will to tackle this disease. We could do with better technology. There's no doubt that we could do with better technology. If we didn't have to treat people for 6 months and we had treatment that would only be 1 month, then that would be a better technology. But we do have the ability to treat this. The United Nations held a high-level meeting to end tuberculosis, but it In contrast to other illnesses and diseases which got a lot of publicity, the high-level meeting to end tuberculosis held in the United Nations 3 weeks ago received very publicity, and what was striking was the lack of political engagement of the countries that have the highest burden of disease. To come back to HIV, the numbers look rosy, but mathematical modeling tells us that if we actually want to control the epidemic and not go back to where we were 15 years ago, we actually have to get not 60% of the HIV-infected population treated, but 90% of the HIV-infected population treated. Otherwise, the epidemic will spiral out of control again. And that means we now have to tackle the hard part. Because who are the people who are not getting treatment? It is vulnerable populations. It is populations that are stigmatized in communities, whether it's gay African American men in the south of the United States, transgender women in parts of Africa and Asia, drug users, or other marginalized individuals. Unless we can tackle this stigma and discrimination in combination with using the technology that we have available, we won't actually affect the outcome, the ultimate outcome. And this epidemic with tuberculosis will become yet again an uncontrolled epidemic, which will marginalize and particularly affect parts of the world that have fewer resources to cope with. So this is an important issue because it really brings the things that we heard about yesterday together. We have technology. How we use it, how we understand its use, and how we apply it in society is really how will be the measure of our success in controlling these epidemics. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Powderly, for this enlightening talk. Now we know how TB and HIV are intersecting. Thank you. I'd also like to thank you for your commitment in treating the HIV patients, as it is not only a viral epidemic, but also a worldwide societal issue. Now, in the remaining 15 minutes, I'd like to open the floor to the audience and to our panelists to start the discussion with these questions and remarks. Please come with you, our panelists. And while we are setting up the stage, maybe I will take my first a bit provocative question. But we all know viruses and bacteria are not all harmful, right? I mean, there are useful bacteria and viruses, and we can distinguish them from each other. But yet, what we consider as harmful and problematic, if we treat them as our enemies and totally eradicate them, totally destroy them, are we on the right track or not? I'd like to ask to our panelists.
So I think this is a really interesting question. The question really is whether or not there's a downside to treating infections. So in other words, are all the infections that we've talked about, do they have a benefit? I think we know that some bacteria, some viruses are actually very important for human health. The last 15 to 20 years has really discovered a new human organ, the microbiome. And the microbiome is undoubtedly important for our health and development, but from the moment we're born. So there is a downside to affecting our microbial environment. But many of the things that we talked about are pathogens. They are things that are responsible for much misery and suffering in human history. And we have very little data to suggest that there is a downside to eradicating these pathogens. The only one we've eradicated from human history is smallpox. There's very little evidence that we have suffered as a species by eradicating smallpox, and I would argue that we don't want to see it back. So I think we need to watch what we're doing, but I think on balance, infection from pathogenic organisms is a bad thing.
Would you like to add something?
I just want to say that unless the disease is terrible enough, there is no political conviction to eradicate it. I mean, look at SARS. People are only concerned because suddenly the GDP disappeared by 5%, and that's why people start to look at it. But in fact, the total number of cases all over the world is only talking about thousands. All right, it's only around 8,000. It's not anything be it cancer or TB or HIV. But when your business hurts, things are very different.
I think everything has pro and con, and when you get treated for infection, you also get the drug resistance. That is the pro and con, but it is the must that we should do to minimize the consequence or the damage. That's why I think infection prevention or vaccine or any initiative to control is very important to do together with the treatment as well.
Thank you very much. Now we can open the floor for questions. Yes, please. Do you need mic?
As access to healthcare improves, as access to healthcare improves, are our immune systems becoming weaker as a consequence?
So the question really says, as access to healthcare improves, is our immune system becoming weaker? I think it's an interesting question in that what we need, we know that we need exposure to microorganisms to develop a normal immune system. And one of the hypotheses that drives much thinking about the emergence of allergic illnesses like asthma and other allergies is the fact that the immune system is not being properly primed because of the eradication of infection and the use of antibiotics. But that remains our hypothesis, and I think we'll need further testing. I think there is no doubt that we do have challenges in terms of what we have done, particularly to the microbiome over the last 40 or 50 years, that we need to understand in terms of normal, healthy human development. But I think it's more complicated than just, we shouldn't use antibiotics because it has to be remembered that antibiotics have saved many lives. I mean, one of the things that we worry about in infectious diseases about resistant bacteria, in part because all of the advances in medicine in terms of cancer chemotherapy, transplant surgery, even complicated surgery for non-cancer related illnesses would not be possible if we didn't have antibiotics.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, we have one question. This gentleman in front. I'm sorry.
There's no mic. Okay, so am I loud enough?
Yes.
All right. I'm wondering, this is about the transmission through animals of infectious diseases. And I'm wondering if there's a role for better ongoing monitoring of supply chains from farms through transport, through markets, through production facilities, and whether there's discussion in major countries about how to improve such monitoring, if it indeed can play a role. Thank you.
I'm sure that would be important. Now we are talking about studies and what we call an animal-human interface. So the monitoring of abattoir workers' serum in terms of the seroprevalence to different pathogens that are prevalent in pigs and poultry, etc. So there are ongoing researches, but bits and pieces. It doesn't seem to be a very unified effort. And of course, one of the biggest problems in China is the practice of what we call backyard farms. So every family has something in their house, but the place where they breed the animals is not actually a qualified or accredited farm setting, which makes control rather impossible in the mainland. But of course, in the United States, all the farms are well very well equipped in terms of biosecurity, which is quite different in the case of in China. But what is highly pertinent is the animal-human interface that require a lot of surveillance in order to control the emergence of all these new diseases.
Thank you. Lady over there.
Hi, thank you for these presentations. My name is Eleni Gavaris. I'm a PhD student in social work, where I focus on the impact of stigma on health. And I really appreciated, Dr. Powderly, that you brought up in Access how stigma impacts marginalized communities, in particular gender nonconforming and sexual minorities, as well as people with stigmatizing illnesses, which HIV and TB is incredibly stigmatizing. And I think one of the things I want to ask is, one of the key kind of consequences of stigma is social isolation and exclusion. And exclusion from employment and systems of power and academia. And I wonder if, we talk about diabetes, we talk about homelessness, we talk about people living with serious mental illness. How do you in your work include these people? Because without inclusion, it's going to be very hard, because sometimes, when people are accessing health services, and particularly as a social worker, we see the fear in how they might be treated in these health services. So how are you including, these vulnerable populations in your work?
Thank you.
I think that's a really important question. One of the things that I regard myself as privileged is to have been working with HIV for 30 years. It was an illness that really brought home for better or for worse, the political aspects of healthcare. And one of the things that happened, I think, that became the norm as time evolved in the United States, was the inclusion of activist communities in decision-making about what the research should be, what are the important priorities for the community, and that remains the same. What has been a challenge is that it was an advantage in the early days of HIV in the United States that HIV affected a politically active community, gay men, and as it has moved more into marginalized communities, mobilizing in that community and helping them to be part of the addressing the solution has remained a priority, but has become more difficult. But I think unless, and I think this has applications right across the world, and also for other diseases, that we have to turn the prism or the lens on the communities that are affected. And I think, as you heard yesterday, this requires not only biomedical science coming up with technologies that will improve health, but understanding the priorities that the individual communities themselves have to enable them to best avail of those technologies. It isn't easy, but that's why you need social science working with medical scientists. That's why you need engineers and lawyers and business people all working together.
Thank you. We have time for one last quick question. And this gentleman right behind, yes, please.
So it's interesting you mentioned both smallpox, which of course was eradicated through vaccination as opposed to treatment, and then you talked about drug-resistant tuberculosis and other things, and then you talked about some social constructs which can mitigate. Both with respect to the developing world and the developed world, where are we on sort of this balance between vaccination-based prevention, lifestyle, cultural, practice-based prevention, and actual treatment on these most important diseases?
Yeah. Okay. Can you repeat your question because you have some echo?
Okay. So the question is, what is the right balance between vaccination, treatment, which we've talked about in terms of resistance, and the social and behavioral approaches to prevention.
That is very challenging in a country that have limited resource. But there's no doubt that the national policy serves as one of the priority. For example, in the era of HIV in Thailand, we have a strong commitment from the government that have the access to all medication, and as a result, and a lot of campaign came out from the commitment from the government, so that really helped. For vaccine standpoint, I think if you talk about the individuals, can be very expensive to spend. But with the national policy, for example, in Thailand, we have the national policy for influenza. All the patients that met the criteria for having the vaccine get the vaccine. So this really depends on the vision and the national policy in my point of view. And of course, this has been shown to be very beneficial in many countries, in developing countries.
Thank you very much. Well, I saw many hands actually, but we will have a coffee break after that, after this session. So please address your questions to our panelists. Thank you. Well,